what's up guys? Welcome back to Bistrom Academy. My name is Shelby and I will be going over the next segment of today's bootcamp. So earlier today, you went through a bunch of videos with Chris explaining what HTML was and getting a really awesome index HTML file set up for your project. Now it should look a little bit something like this, as well as a preview page that looks like this. You have your header that should be blue and italic with some content. I chose to do a website about Baby Yoda because obviously Baby Yoda is the best and he is so cute. So I put some content in here to talk about Baby Yoda. Very basic, very bare bones. So we are going to go in today with CSS and make this website look something a little more like this, with some background colors, some new fonts, some new heading with the different font here as well, to even something like this, where we have a column and a nice sidebar and a nice container for our website. But before we get into all of that, let's quickly run through what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to go over a quick introduction of CSS and what it is, as well as some starter color properties, some fonts, selectors with CSS, positioning, inline versus block, as well as pseudo classes. Now, a lot of this might sound kind of confusing to you, but I promise we will dive deep into all of this and it will really make sense of what these rules and properties of CSS are. And then we'll start making your HTML look really awesome. So first, before we start writing any CSS rules, what is it? CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. CSS is what's considered a style sheet language that lets you style the elements on your HTML page. It's super important to know that CSS works in conjunction with your HTML, but is not necessarily HTML itself. So what can it do? CSS is super powerful, in my opinion, the most exciting thing to write. It can do anything from changing the color of your text, the position of elements on your page, and even size of images and fonts. A good example I like to use when explaining how powerful CSS is going to the Bistrom Academy site. So you can see here we have a nice header with a blue background, we have a Conquer the Web heading with the white text, a subheading here with a darker text, and even sections with different backgrounds and things changing when we actually interact with them on the page. Now this is all stuff that is powered by CSS. And one way to really show that as an example, let me scroll back to the top here, is to open up that inspector tool that Chris talked about earlier. Now, remember, this is the HTML that is existing as a local instance of the website that you're looking at. So if I go in here and I'm going to search for what's called .css, this basically means this is the CSS file applied to this website living on the internet right now. If I locally go and delete this, you can kind of see the website becomes pretty similar to what your HTML file looks like right now. There's not much style to it. It's pretty much just a bare bones structured content. But then if I refresh, it goes to that beautiful looking website. So the CSS rule. Before we move forward, it is super important to reiterate that all of your CSS will be living in a separate file. On your glitch project, you should have what's called a style.css file with a comment that says CSS files and styling rules to your content. It's important to know that everything I'm going to be going over today should be written in this file and not in your index file. The CSS rule is made up of 4 main parts. You have your selector, your property, and your value, as well as what's called curly brackets that holds what's called a declaration. And a declaration is made up of a property and a value. So again, here's another example of the CSS rule. And just to go a little more in detail about it, it is basically just a block of CSS code. This rule starts with what's called a selector, and it has sets of properties and values. And again, a property value pair is considered a declaration. So to get in a little bit of the CSS syntax and how to use these rules, Declarations are the property and value of a style you plan to use on any HTML element on your website. And it's very, very important to know that declarations always end with a semicolon. And they're always grouped by those curly brackets. So in this example, you have a selector with 3 declarations that are grouped by those curly brackets following the selector. Always put the semicolon at the end of your declaration because that way your browser will know when one declaration ends and another begins. So with these CSS rules in your CSS file being completely separate from your HTML, we need to know how to actually connect these CSS rules to talk to your HTML and apply these styles. So there's 3 ways you can do this: the inline way, embedded, or external. The first way, inline, is to use what's called the style attribute in your HTML. Now, Chris went over attributes a little bit with your HTML elements earlier, but as a quick refresher, it's important to know that your attribute always has your value that is paired to the attribute with an equal sign. So in this example, this is saying that this p tag has the attribute of style with the declaration of color red applied to it. Now, this is going to work on your site. Say I take this, we're going to copy it, go to my index file, and let's find a paragraph here, and we'll follow the example from the slides. Now, I applied this. Let's add a semicolon in there for good syntax practice. If I go to my website and refresh it, you can see that my paragraph tag turned red. Now again, even though this does work, it's not necessarily ideal. Say you wanted all of these paragraph tags to turn red, you would have to go into each one in your HTML and add that attribute to every paragraph tag. It's not preferred. This becomes repetitive and super difficult to use in large projects. Say for a real world example, you have a client who originally wanted every paragraph tag to be red. And you go in and you use these inline attributes and you style all of the p tags to be red this way. And then if they come back and say, oh, we wanted these to be blue now, you have to go in and change each value of that attribute for every paragraph tag that you styled with this inline way. The really only way that I find this method preferred is when you are using JavaScript to manipulate something on your page. And that way you can easily apply an attribute through JavaScript and you can change the styles that way. But in terms of visual appearance, we don't want to use inline for when we're styling our elements. Another way that we can connect our CSS to our HTML is through embedding it. Now this one looks a little bit more structured because in this example you can see that we have a CSS rule, but it still isn't really ideal because this can only be used in each HTML file on your page. And it's super repetitive, and this is when you get what's called code bloat. And you are using the same thing over and over, and it just gets very hard to read and your HTML file will get very big. So this example is saying we want every paragraph tag on this page to have these 2 declarations applied to it, and that is the color will be blue and the font size will be 12 pixels. Now this will live in the head tags of your HTML file. So let's see what happens when I copy this. Let's get rid of this inline style that I did. Put it in the head of our project. We'll format this to make a little bit more sense. So it's important to know that when you use this method, it has to live in the head tag of your page. Now if I refresh my page, all of my paragraph tags become blue. So this is kind of achieving a little bit more of what we wanted, and it doesn't mean that this isn't going to work. It's just still not preferred because as you start adding more and more rules to this file, your HTML file can get pretty big. So say we want to do another one of H1 to be pink, and the font size to be 35. This will work, but again, as you keep adding more rules, it's going to get very big and your HTML file could be very hard to read for someone coming in later to look at your code. So again, usable, but not preferred. The final way to do this is what I think is the most preferred way, and that is by linking a style sheet to your HTML file. Now again, this will be code that is going to be added to the head of your HTML file, but this will be the only line that you have to add. You won't have any of those CSS rules living in your HTML, because what this link is doing is linking an external style sheet to your HTML file. This is a great way to have your CSS be a shared resource for several pages, and it reduces the file size of your HTML file, and it's super easy to maintain. So what this is saying is, by adding this link tag and doing this rel attribute of style sheet as well as type text CSS, it is saying that whatever this href value is, that is where all your styles are going to live. So in this example, that is what's using what is called a relative path, like Chris went over earlier, to your CSS file living in your project. So in this example, this is saying that your styles.css file is living at the same level as the HTML file that this link is added to. So let's take a look at our project and see how our CSS is being added to our website. So Glitch actually did a really great job of making this super easy for us, and they created a CSS file for us already that is linked through the link tag. So on line 13 for me, this will be a link tag that has a style sheet reference to it. And the href in this instance is saying that the style.css file will be where all of our CSS is living. It's really important to remember that for this href value, the name has to match the name of your style sheet. So if I did something like Shelby's, if I could type, Shelby's styles, my CSS automatically would break because there is not a Shelby style CSS file in here, but there is a style file. So we'll revert this back to the style file because that is where my styles are living. And that is how our CSS is getting applied. So again, another real world example here, like I've shown in my CSS file, is using the elements of your HTML as selectors in your CSS. So this first example is saying that every paragraph tag on the page will have that property and value applied to it. So that can be anything from color, the font size, the background color, pretty much anything that you can imagine. The second example is a little bit different, and this is targeting all of your image tags. So a really fun way I really like to spruce up my CSS is by using color values. Now there's 4 different ways that your browser accepts colors in your CSS, and that's through color name, hexadecimal value, RGB value, and the HSL value. There's 17 standard color names that out of the box work for your CSS, and those are listed here. So say I wanted a green. We'll choose green because, you know, Yoda's green, and I wanted to use that in my styles. So I will go into my style, and let's change all my paragraph tags to be the color green. Now if I refresh my page, you can see all of these are this green color. And again, that is the out-of-the-box color that works with your browser. But say I don't really like how this color looks with Yoda. It doesn't match 100%. We will go in and use what's called a hexadecimal value. These are a bunch of characters that you never have to memorize, but there are a few common ones, like knowing the color black is going to be 6 zeros and the color white will be 6 Fs. But luckily, Google has made it really easy for us to choose a hexadecimal value for any color that we prefer. So let's go into Google and search for color picker. The page comes up with this really great UI element that shows every color you could imagine. So now I liked that green color, but I want to do something a little bit darker. Maybe something like this. You can see that Google actually generates that hex value for me. So I'm going to copy this. And instead of using one of those 17 colors in my CSS, I'm going to paste that right into there for the value of that declaration. Now if I refresh my page, you can see the color changed and it's a very dark green. Now it's kind of hard to tell here because I refreshed and it's so close to black. But another cool trick to check out your CSS is to open up that inspector. And if you hover over any HTML element and look to this panel to the right, it is going to tell you what styles are being applied to it. So this is saying that every p tag has this color applied to it through a rule in my style.css file. You can do anything like toggle this color. You can go in and use the color out of the box color picker. So say I liked that green, but it was a little too green for me. I want something more lighter like this. I can copy this hex value because remember, when you manipulate anything on your inspector, it's not actually changing the code on the website. It's just for that local instance. It's just a really cool tool to let you really debug stuff on the fly and not have to keep editing a file and refreshing your page, because compiling becomes an issue and it's way faster to do it this way. So now we can see I have this nice green text on all my paragraph tags using this hexadecimal value for the color green. So that property I just used was the color property, and this, as you can tell, changes the color of text of the selector you are applying this declaration to. In this example, it is showing that a paragraph tag is going to have the color red, and these are just 3 different ways to show those different color values. The first one being from that list of those 17 colors. The second is the hexadecimal value, and the third is your RGB value. Similar to color is another property called the background color. So, as you can guess, the background color changes the background of whatever selector you choose in your CSS. This example is showing it for the paragraph tag, but I find that I really like using the background color for the body tag. And this will change the color of your whole website. So another fun thing that you guys can look at in your own time is what's called color schemes. So I knew I wanted my website to be about Yoda, and I'm really bad about picking colors. I can sit there all day with the color picker and just really be unproductive and try to get the perfect colors. But there are so many resources out there that make getting these color schemes easy for you. So all I did was search Baby Yoda color scheme. And this website of loading.io came up. And it actually generated a great color palette of these 5 different colors. And if I click on each one, you can manipulate it with the color picker to say, oh, I don't like this green just as much. I want it to be a little more yellow. And it spits out that hex value for you. But I'm actually going to refresh because I like this color. But I know I want this nice tan that's similar to Baby Yoda's robe to be the background of my website. So I'm going to go into my rule, make a new line for a new declaration. Now, it will still render if you have your declarations all in one line, but code formatting becomes very important with your CSS, so just try to keep every declaration you write on its own line. So we're going to do background color, going to paste in that color. If I refresh my page, now that body tag has this nice tan color matching Baby Yoda. I don't really like how this heading has this color blue that Glitch put in there for me. So feel free to go ahead and remove that heading tag style if you prefer. Or if you want to keep it there just to get used to how to write a rule, that's totally fine too. But feel free to get rid of it. Alright guys, so let's take a quick code break here. We went over the intro of CSS, what it is, how to write a CSS rule, and kind of what makes up a CSS rule. We went over changing the font color, the background color, working with hexadecimal values. So I want you to now challenge yourself and try to go select some elements on your page. We went over how to target paragraph tags and headings, but go try to select some links on your page and change the color of those and see what happens. This is when we start to get kind of creative with our code and kind of experiment to see what we can do to really get the colors working on our website. And again, feel free to go pick out any color scheme for your site. I believe there is color scheme picker. Google is your best friend when you start to learn these things. This first result will have a great selection of colors that you can use for your website. So start the generator. Say we like this color, so we toggle the lock, hit the space bar, and it spits out more colors that will work for you. And below, these are the hexadecimal values you would use in your CSS. But it's important to remember when you copy these that you need to have that pound sign in front of this value in your CSS. All right, guys, so have at it, and we will sync up in the next video.